let's make like a short, how are you feeling, guys? until we are putting everything online. So it's gonna take 3 minutes. Who would like to start? I think Charlie, yes, like always.
Far be it from me to set the tone, but I'm feeling great. I really appreciate, Thomas, all the work that you've done in an incredibly short amount of time to have a global e-conference. It's mind-boggling. And coming together and syncing up on the lessons each of us are learning in how to prepare for the post-COVID-19 world is a wonderful opportunity to help accelerate what we're doing with CleanTech. So thank you.
Okay, so we are already online on the session website, and now we are just clicking on the major screen. It's quite efficient, it's like first time. We set up in just 3 weeks, everything. Yeah. But it works quite well.
And Tomasz, you have something on the Q&A from Eike Weber?
Eike, I always forget to include in the discussion the chairman. And he's always putting the hand. But our chairman laughs us. So. Oh, Paula is also.
Hello, Paula.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, this is so amazing group of people, actually. Eike,
Thank
again,
you
I
so
forgot
much
about
for
you. I'm very sorry because I see you every day, so.
It's nice to see everybody.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Paula. How nice to see you again.
Yes, hi, Eike. Hold on, I've got to get my coffee.
And of course, Bernadette, hello. And of course, Charlie. Dr. Sola, this is something new, yeah. Why not Professor Sola?
Well, because Charlie is modest,
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
It's a nice Indian design you have in the background. That's Indian, right? Looks nice.
It's my wife's quilting.
Oh.
So actually, we are already on YouTube, yes, and also on our website on YouTube. So you see, it's working quicker and quicker, yes?
Yeah.
We had some difficulties at the first session, but now it's working better and better. So I believe it will be every day.
I still have the railways, but I like the railway motifs, of course, but it's not yet on. But will be soon.
Okay, so maybe just I will start before all the chairman and panelists, because you see, like we would like to at the beginning always to motivate people, yes, and to explain why we are together here, yes. So just very shortly, small video, 30 seconds, just.
Not again.
Forget the war.
Think about how it could be. A new mindset has arrived, where to share has become our greatest power.
It is this energy that guides us, will enlighten us, where meaning and purpose is a flame.
Burn inside every soul on the planet.
Welcome to the human-to-human model, uniting and inspiring leaders globally.
To build together with meaningfulness and joy.
Opening new possibilities for people.
Anticipating disruption. Rethinking society.
Who will reach their potential because the future is today.
Join us
to be sustainable plus 100 world.
I think right now is clearly the way to act. Lack of clean energy will affect the Earth's core later.
I find that when people begin making small changes, they gradually get bigger because they get this feeling, I am doing something.
So we moved from greed-based civilization to human value-based civilization. Making money is a happiness. Making other people happy is a super happiness.
Wondering about your future? So bring your DNA to us today.
So thank you so much for watching this video. And then if you haven't seen or registered yet to the system for the networking for all the other sessions, so please register later on CleanTech eConvention.com. Yes. Okay, so everybody is now in the room, so I think we can start our discussion. So maybe first, Ike, I would like to ask you, like, you were in the waiting room, so maybe you can start first as the chairman of the whole conference with the welcome to participants. Yes.
Let's be brief. I think we all agree that we are in a very, very unique situation in the world right now. And I think, Thomas, you have done a great job to form the Solar Business Club, now CleanTech Business Club, because right now we are facing a very important point in time. On the one hand side, the recognition that the global climate crisis is really something they have to deal with, not by 2050, but by 2030, is really spreading out quickly. Fridays for Future and others do it. But the other point is the Corona crisis has shown us that if the world accepts and realizes the global crisis, we can move things, we can change things, which we saw just 6 months ago would be impossible. So I think we should come out of the crisis with a very big motivation. Now we can do it. Now we have to move politicians, we have to move everybody. And of course, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the forces which are against changing to renewables, reducing emissions, are being put into the cave and lock the door, and they should not influence us anymore. And I think United States, even if we have right now a president who is not yet on our track, but November is coming soon. Let's see what happens. But the United States are, I think, extremely important. And of course, in the United States, we have the West Coast and East Coast. We have California, we have New York, Massachusetts, and other states who are very, very much going ahead. So I hope the United States will be a very important part of the global change and transformation to the renewable energy system. Let's work all on it. And I think, as Thomas likes to say, it's in our DNA to do so. So thanks for being here.
So maybe shortly also the chair of the conference, Dr. Charlie Gay, and then I give power to Christian. And it's such a pleasure because we are working together with Christian. Then we didn't work together, but you see, like when you share the same passion and when you fight for the same goal, so at the end of the day, we always meet. Yes. And thank you so much, Christian, for taking this responsibility. So first I give the floor to Dr. Charlie Gay, and then I give the floor to Christian. So Christian, you will manage everything.
Thanks, Thomas. Also, it's important to point out this coming Wednesday, as part of this event, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And a lot of the momentum I think we can build on ties all the way back to that first Earth Day, 1870. And the opportunities that we have, it's a huge opportunity to create lots of jobs. And as we come out of the pandemic situation, helping people save money, thinking about the cash flow that they have to work with, and identifying ways to create a lot of jobs rapidly are themes that we can all share together. The learning is happening at the edges. Each country has got some innovations. Europe has been ahead on peer-to-peer business, aggregating electricity and sharing that, all because of the impact of digital resources. And this very conference is an example of how to use those digital resources very effectively. So I'm excited that we could come together. I've been impressed to see that some of the innovations that have been happening already here in the US, the Solar Energy International team, a training group, has set a goal of 1 million new trained folks over the next decade to help increase the number of jobs that go with our technologies. And it's been interesting to me to see states here in the US take charge. New York, California, all are seizing this moment to identify what they can do to become increasingly self-reliant And I think that percolates all the way through to individuals thinking about their own self-reliance now that solar and storage are so inexpensive. So we have a great opportunity to put our thoughts together and set some goals that we could all share as we come out of the pandemic. So thanks, Thomas. I'll turn this over to you now, Christian.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gay. I really appreciate it. I'm Christian Roseland, the editorial director at Rocky Mountain Institute, and I'm happy to be the moderator for this session of World CleanTech Week's eConvention. Today is the Markets Day, and this is the session on North America. So for all of you just joining, I'd like to quickly introduce all of the panelists and speakers that we have here. In the lower right-hand corner, we have Dr. Eike Weber, who is the chair of the CleanTech Business Club, and obviously a veteran in the solar industry. Someone who's well known for his work at Fraunhofer ISA, among other organizations. Of course, Dr. Charlie Gay, who has been involved with more organizations than I can keep track of, including currently the External Advisory Board of the Energy and Homeland Security Project at Sandia National Laboratories. Dr. Gay has been in solar for 45 years, which is as long as I've been alive. So I always remember that when speaking with him. I'd also like to introduce the other co-chair, which Bernadette Del Chiaro, someone who I've been lucky to interview many times over the years. Bernadette is the executive director of the California Solar and Energy Storage Association, and someone who knows solar and storage markets better, particularly in California, better than just about anyone I know. For our panel, we have Anna Ebers-Broel from Tetra Tech. She's an ecological statistician, formerly worked at the Solar Energy Technologies Office at the US Department of Energy. She's also a behavioral economist. So we're going to be having some questions about her particular insights on that coming up. Durek Ozolu, who is with Trina Solar, one of the world's largest solar manufacturers. He's the country manager for Canada. By the way, Trina recently shipped its first 500-watt modules based on 210mm wafers. Very impressive technical feat. Durek has been with Trina for 6 years. We have Peter Tertzakian from the ARC Energy Research Institute, which is part of ARC Financial Corps. He's had more than 30 years in the business of energy, from oil and gas to renewables. Martin Keller, who's the director at the US Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratories, or NREL. I have to say that as an American, NREL is my personal favorite use of tax dollars. It's played a pivotal role in moving forward renewable energy, but also our understanding of things such as how we can get more clean energy on the grid and move to a clean energy future. And Dr. Alex Lavron, he's the CEO of Electrical Grid Modeling. He's also someone who's had a very long career in the solar industry. I first met Dr. Lavron when he was at ABB. He led the building of one of the world's largest inverter companies, which was Power One, which was later acquired by ABB. And finally, we're going to be hearing from veteran solar researcher Paula Mintz, who was well established in this field when I started 10 years ago. So if I can quickly go into the topic here about what we'll be discussing before handing it over to Paula for an introductory presentation. You know, we're at an historic moment right now. I think we all know this. The IPCC has given us 10 years to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by half if we're to have any chance of staying on a 1.5C pathway, which some people think is already lost. And in the middle of this, we're having a global pandemic with more than 166,000 deaths, wide-scale shutdown of businesses. So some of the questions we're going to ask today is, how has this crisis affected clean technology development and markets? And how can we move from the negative COVID disruption to a positive clean tech disruption? This is roughly going to be taken in two parts. In the first, we're going to talk about the current situation regarding clean technology and energy overall in North America, including circumstances in specific geographies and markets. And then in the second part, we're going to talk about what this crisis means for the future of clean tech and how we're going to come out of this stronger. So, oh, and at the end, we'll take some audience questions. So to get this going, Paula, if you'd like to give your presentation.
I would. And what do I do? Share screen. Yay, that's so good to be able to work the technology. Host disabled, participant screen sharing. Alrighty. I am unable to share my screen, Christian, so what shall I do? Christian? You're muted, Christian.
Oh, I'm just a second. Take a second to unmute. Tomasz, do you have any information on how she can share her screen? Because I can't seem to do it from my side.
Oh, wait a minute. Nope. Okay. Finally, now I've got it back. Yay. Woohoo. All right. So here we go. So good to be able to work the
I
technology.
didn't notice my sound was on the mute.
All right. So in keeping with listening to all the, first of all, I'm very grateful to be able to speak this morning and to have the honor of speaking with friends and people I admire. And it's so nice to see your faces again. This is a difficult time for everybody in the world and horrific loss, obviously. And we all need to pull together. And I second absolutely the fact that we have a role to play in the future. So I'm going to start out on a positive note, which, knowing me is unusual. So the positive note is I do think that following this crisis, that we will see an acceleration in solar growth. And it will probably be beyond all the original forecasts. And the reason I believe that is we're seeing in all countries the better air. We can breathe better. My sinuses are better, which is great during a pandemic not to be sneezing, right? We're going to see in most countries an acceleration of solar growth. Smaller applications such as residential, small commercial, off-grid are going to need some government help, primarily because, well, let's be honest, affordability is going to be an issue all over the world for a long time. So when governments step forward with loan programs, et cetera, to help people afford solar, I think we'll, again, back to the being self-sustainable, being able to have your own power source. Those are values that I think are really held closely now, being able to stand on your own 2 feet. For the US, since that's what I'm supposed to talk about, that's going to rely on a new administration. Let's just be really candid here. State by state by state, there will be movement, but we need some federal impetus behind this. And we need a government, an administration that is going to stop rolling back clean air guidelines and rules, et cetera. So with the new administration, with either administration will come significant stimulus. There will need to be significant stimulus all over the world. And with a new administration will become a Green New Deal. I believe that strongly. And with the Green New Deal will become a push for solar, wind, all renewables, storage, more money in the pipeline, an extension of the ITC probably at 30%, particularly if we also hold if the Democrats, obviously I've now outed myself as a Democrat, Democrats hold the Senate and the House. So, and I think given the polls, and as a researcher, I have huge skepticism about polls, but given the evidence and data in the market, it really does look like we are moving towards, at least for Democrats, we're moving in that direction. So cross your fingers. Now, up until then, unfortunately, and I mean this for every forecast in the world, there is no way to forecast anything for the next 3 years. And the reason is that all the rule books are thrown out. So a good forecaster relies on history and gathering data, then looking back at the history to establish a trend over time. It's a long, tedious, I love it, but hey, slow process. When I've trained people in market research, I've driven them screaming from the room when they really realize it's sitting alone with data. So any forecast between now and likely 2022 is not reliable. We're going to see periods of toggling up and down, social distancing, and then opening up society, social distancing, opening society. In some countries, solar may be an essential business. In some countries, it may not. Construction may be shut down, manufacturing may be shut down, supply chains disrupted, which we are already seeing and have seen. So this is going to be a rocky time. And in the US, We are right now, as you can see on this slide, sitting on a lot of demand side inventory. There's a lot of safe harbor buying in 2019. I have a lot of clients on the demand side. So, and that's where my research really focuses on both, but there's a lot of inventory out there. Eventually that's going to be worked off when people can work again. And when that happens, there's scarcity. In terms of pricing, because the scarcity is compounded with manufacturers not being able to get things from here to there to here to there, or, et cetera, the likelihood is prices will stay low. Typically in times of scarcity, all the economic models say prices go up. I don't think that is just me not thinking that's the case. But back to what I originally said, who knows? So moving along, this is US supply and demand. We had a really good year last year, like 20 gigawatts came into the US. Not all of it installed. Again, we have a good amount of inventory in the US right now. What we don't have in the US is a really solid supply chain. We import most of our cells. As you can see, we have 1 gigawatt of cell manufacturing, primarily for solar. It's over that now. I mean, it's above that right now. That was 2019 numbers. And about 4.4 mostly idle module assembly. They've got to be able to get cells from something else, somewhere else. So how do you do that, right? You don't have cell production in the US. So here's the lesson I'd like everybody to take through this. And I know we love lower prices. Those lower prices come at a cost. For decades, I've been intimating, and at least for the last 15 years, I've been writing, and at least Charlie gets my solar flare, so he's been reading this. I've been writing about how vulnerable markets without their own supply chain are to disruption. In my wildest dreams, I never envisioned a pandemic as a disruption, but that's what we have now. So when we recover, anyone who has influence with governments, those who are lobbying, the lobbying also it shouldn't just go for construction. We need a supply chain in the US, since that's the market I'm talking about, but also Europe. You have to have cell production, backsheet production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't, you end up in the situation we are now, where if you can't get stuff in, you really can't build it. So that would be the lesson I want to give you. So you take a look at the demand, growing, growing, growing. Going to be down, down, down this year. No way around it. I know that the smaller installers I talk to who are not considered essential, or are, it's very confusing to some of them, are out installing storage to people who can afford it because of the panic over being able to just sustain yourself. Anyway, so the demand is there. Affordability won't be for a while. We need government intervention, and we desperately need a supply chain. So this doesn't make any difference, right? Right now, I would say forget that 41 cents. Typically, and also this is something I wrote before I finished all my data for 2019. I'm in the middle of writing a report. So last year, the global average for modules was 36 cents. This year, probably 30. I would say that's where we're looking. It's going to be held down for a while. In my opinion, it's very hard to say. It's just like the stock market's going up and down and up and down and up and down. You don't know. It's impossible to forecast. That's the truth. Going forward, if you're going to have your own supply chain, country by country by country, there's going to have to be, prices will increase because there's a lot of subsidization out of the countries where, let's just say, close to 80% of the supply is. A lot of inexpensive manufacturing. If you don't have that luxury, prices will go up. But I would say the cost of dirty air and not having a sustainable supply chain when you need it are far higher. This is what I'm looking at globally. So again, no reliable forecast, but there's no way there's not going to be a dip. And in the best case, it's 25% off of last year's really historic 123.5 gigawatts of shipments. So again, that's shipments to the first buyer. A lot of that is inventory. There's inventory from the previous year. Now, I want to leave us on actually a positive note. That positive note is that after we get through this period, The momentum is there in every country in the world, even in the US, even with this administration. It's just going to be much more dramatic in the US if we have a different administration. Sorry to be political, but it is the truth. The momentum is there, and my belief, it's just a belief, is that the growth outside of this period will be beyond the accelerated view of pretty much anybody. We have to have the supply chains to do that, and we have to be able to build it. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Paula. Fascinating presentation. Very interesting, some of the angles that you have on that. So if I can get all of our panelists now to unmute themselves. We're going to go into this first part where we talk about the current situation with Paula's prompt. And I'm going to do something experimental here. We're going to just quickly go around and have everyone in 10 words or less tell me what you think the biggest changes that you're seeing at this time right now. So I'll start with you, Anna, Dr. Bravo.
Great. Thank you, everybody. In my view, energy transition is like losing weight. And at the moment, we have lost track of the long-term goal because we have broken a leg because COVID-19 happened. So to me, the biggest change will be to look at the short term, the presentation that Paula has given, what is going to happen in 2020, but we also need to switch back to long-term thinking, which is how do we pull off energy transition?
Great. Great insights. A little bit more than 10 words there, but we'll cut those off of the other end. Dr. Leveron, and I'm just going in the order you're appearing on my screen, if anyone's wondering.
I think the biggest change that we see now is that the financial support of solar power plants and solar installations is scarce, is gone because of financial community is in a lockdown. So I think this will be a very important factor to support the growth that we anticipate in the next this year and next few years.
Okay, great. Dr. Tertsekian.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I think the biggest change is the catastrophic demand loss in the near term and the likelihood that energy demand is going to come back slowly. It has two effects. One is very cheap energy prices, including price of the incumbents that we're trying to transition away from, particularly oil. And number two, energy security is a big issue that is going to be coming back. That was already somewhat mentioned, but I think leveraging off energy security as a mechanism to facilitate the transition going forward will be easier to do than leveraging off the climate change agenda. They're both related, but I think there's a unique opportunity, and I can expand on that later.
I look forward to that. This discussion of security versus climate mitigation is somewhat near to my heart. Mr. Keller from NREL.
Yeah, so yeah, can you hear me now? I changed my system. Can you hear me?
You're appearing twice, but I can hear you.
How do you do
yeah,
that?
carrying twice. Okay, let me close this. Is it better now? Okay.
Yes.
So look, I think I want to repeat what most people say, that the biggest concern I have right now is the low oil price, in my opinion, will slow down the transition over to a clean energy. So what we're seeing across the whole nation, I think there's also, thank you for this presentation, it's very interesting. I also not so completely pessimistic. A lot of the changes are driven by the different states and communities like now, even with our current administration. My hope was that this trend will continue as soon as we stabilize our economy again. But overall, I would predict that this will slow us down for at least 2 to 3 years, in my opinion.
2 to 3 years. We hope not, but that's what we're seeing. Mr. Ozolu.
Well, I see there is a potential for an accelerated transition in the way we consume energy as the whole world. For example, traveling costs or traveling footprint is converted into data transfer over fiber networks, for example. So the way we use energy will be changing drastically in a short time than we assumed. So, and the way to manage the energy going forward will need to be considered much more differently than before. So there's an acceleration in all these transitions. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Bernadette, your thoughts?
From a California point of view, we went from one crisis of blackouts and wildfires to global pandemic. Energy as resiliency for your home in particular, and for schools and other businesses is ever more critical. That's the biggest change. Everything else is going to be based on the economy.
Yeah, I'm hearing more from this resilience side. It's interesting. It's definitely something we're going to be getting into. Dr. Solar, Dr. Gay.
You can just call me Charlie, please. I'd like to springboard. I'd really like Peter's theme around energy security. And a lot of what has been developed and coming out of NREL and the Energy System Integration Facility is the ability to integrate microgrids. So I think putting emphasis on our own self-reliance and using security, especially cybersecurity themes, would be a good target for us.
Great. And to close off here, Dr. Weber. Thoughts?
I want to be brief, all of the above what the others said, but 2 additional points. In the Europe session, we discussed that in the second half of this year, there might be a real shortage of modules because the module fabrication in China was disrupted, and suddenly the whole world might be scrambling for modules. And maybe, Paula, you're right, because if there's a undersupply of modules, prices will not go down anymore. The second issue I just want to mention and throw into the water is the new player in the game will be green hydrogen. In Europe, we are already starting pretty forcefully recognizing that we need plenty of green hydrogen for the decarbonization of production, steel production, concrete production, and this will get an additional push for the quicker implementation of PV than we planned up to now.
I see some nods here around hydrogen. Certainly some thoughts around that we might get to later. Thank you, Dr. Weber, and to all of our panelists. Paula, we're going to skip you because we had 10 minutes of your thoughts on what's going on right now, and we'll get into some specific questions for specific panelists. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Tertsekian. Your research looks obviously at a wide range of energy sources, and maybe speaking beyond Canada and looking at North America. Obviously, oil production is in serious straits right now with the price of oil being at multi-decade lows. Can you give us some high-level overviews of how that sets the stage for other energy sources right now and what that means in the big picture?
Yeah, thank you. So the price of oil is basically collapsed in many inland regions, producing regions like Canada, even inland United States. The price today is going negative.
Below 20, yeah.
So this is a huge signal, for necessary signal for the producers to shut in their production. Some of those production shut-ins will be permanent because of the way oil reservoirs work. This is not only North America, but around the world. The storage tanks are going to be full. So the way it's likely to play out is that over the course of the next year, certainly 6 months, going to have very low prices, which means very low gasoline prices. It's effectively a negative carbon tax or a carbon incentive for people. And so, but however, depending upon the extent of the impairment, there are different views on this, but as said, depending on how low the prices, how long the prices stay low, you could actually see a situation within 12 to 18 months where the price of oil would actually like an elastic go the other way, which would rebound to high prices. And that would create, I think, again, the situation, as I alluded to, the energy security. I'll just close by saying that, you know, the last time we had empty freeways, I'm old enough to remember, and I've studied it, the oil price shocks of the 1970s. That was a situation where our energy security was challenged because we had shortages at the gasoline pumps and so on. And that was a situation where the policy response around the world was driven by energy security, and that the ready and available alternative at the time was nuclear power of any scale. And there was a lot of policy driven towards getting off oil and getting onto alternatives. The other policy response at the time was in places like Europe and Japan. The price of gasoline, petrol, was increased with a large tax, and that tax was used to fund public transportation on the demand, change consumption behavior on the demand side. So there's many analogies. So just to wrap up, you know, we could be seeing a situation where oil supply chains are actually permanently impaired. We can see certainly a situation where the Russians and the Saudis take significant market share away from North America, creating energy security concerns. And if you draw the parallels to what happened in the 1970s and early 80s, then one can see that there are pathways to policy initiatives to drive the alternatives. Today, the alternatives, of course, are the renewables and electric vehicles on the consumption side and things like that. But I think there's lots of lessons to be learned, given the way the play from the 1970s and early 80s, given the way things are being driven right now.
So yeah, so if we look at market dynamics, maybe quickly, Martin, if you mentioned in your introduction as well that you feel that the current environment of the low oil price could have larger impacts on renewable energy uptake and clean energy overall. Can you elaborate a little bit about what you're seeing right now?
So look, I think that when you see where the energy future goes, we're seeing an integration between transportation and electricity, which we mostly use, let's say, in our houses, and also on the industrial side. So now my worry is with the decrease in oil, we will see a much slower transition over to electric vehicles, for example, and this will have a major impact. So I think this is a really very different than just having a low oil prices, because suddenly you have the low oil prices, you see a slower down in the electrification of transportation. And in addition, a lot of our communities might not have the funds right now to make the transition to more solar and wind. So that's why I was expecting that we see at least perhaps a slowing down of the transition for another year or two, perhaps, till all this is again stabilized. So my worry now is when you look out into the future, as you all know, in my view, we have a relatively good plan in doing the transition in electricity generation. We have wind, we have solar, geothermal, and others. So we are on a good path. There's a lot of, when you, for example, look at California, we've done a study in LA, what it will mean to go to 100% renewable energy. So there is a plan which we can implement. The concern I have is on the transportation sector. And I mean, Eike said this already, in Germany, we're seeing, there's a huge push towards hydrogen. There's a lot of discussion also within our research here at NREL to see how can you produce green hydrogen, how can we then use hydrogen and transition this over to what we call electrons to molecules. Europe calls this power to X. So we need to find a way to create hydrocarbons for long-term storage, but also for transportation. And now with the low oil price, my worry is that a lot of these new initiatives are coming to a stop. We're seeing this in one of the big agreements we have with ExxonMobil, for example, where they're trying to explore how can you go over to synthetic hydrocarbons. Shell is going in a very similar path, but right now my concern is that this will come to a stop for at least a year or two.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. By the way, I noticed people are putting comments in the Q&A. That's great. We will get to those in around half an hour. So when we do the full question and answer session, we're going to go through some of the discussion here before we get to those. Mr. Keller, that's a very interesting insight. You know, just a counterpoint here, when I've spoken with Bloomberg New Energy Finance, they suggest that a lot of the decision around personal purchase of electric vehicles has very little to do with the cost of gasoline. Certainly for fleets, this could have an impact, but on the personal market, that it's much more about the upfront cost and the sticker cost, not so much, which is reflective of battery prices, more than fuel prices. What's your take on that?
So yeah, but look, it's in my view, you're correct. I mean, that people are not buying this right now. A lot of people going down the electric cars because they want to be part of the trend and making the transition. But look, this crisis took so much money out of our economy that people will question if they should buy a new car or not. So perhaps the old gas car is lasting another 2 years or so. And that's why I think we're seeing a slowing down in the transition. So we will see this, and of course, when you see right now, historically, we always saw that a low gas price is pushing people more to bigger cars. So, but right now, I think the key is that right now the economy lost so much money that I'm worried if people are right now willing to step up and turn in the gasoline car and buy an electric car. And that's why I think we're seeing a slowdown. Not so much that there's a cost aspect in there, but just there is upfront capital to invest into these new electric cars, I think is taken out.
Yeah, great answer. Certainly, I think there's a lot of worry in the EV market about slowdown, just no one's buying cars at all.
Yeah.
Certainly. So when we talk about another, well, it's a consumer device that's electricity generating. Certainly, there's a lot of you have expressed concern about the development of the solar market in the United States. Paula's numbers for, I believe those were global numbers, were a little bit shocking. Bernadette, California is obviously the largest solar market in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere. On the rooftop solar side, what should we expect for the next year?
I mean, anybody that's really giving hard numbers and predicting anything is just being well paid for predicting the impossible. But nevertheless, we are seeing first off, 95% impact in the negative for all of our industry and all of our companies. But we have reason to be optimistic. I think unlike electric cars, electricity in your home, electricity in your business, it's an essential resource, and it's not a it's not something that's optional. You have to have that energy resource, and we are seeing the sense of energy security in California shaken by the last 2 years and wildfire season, among other things. And so I think there's reason to still remain cautiously optimistic that more and more California consumers are going to be choosing a safer, more reliable source of energy, being energy storage paired with solar panels that are local. I don't think we have to wait for complicated microgrids for the whole community. I think we can see a big reason to be optimistic in investments, consumer investments in distributed energy resources. And I think we can be shovel ready, if you will, in terms of being very nimble and quick to respond to that increased demand. And we're starting to see an increase in customers reaching out to our businesses here in California, even amidst COVID. That said, like I said at the beginning, the economy overall has to get back up on its feet in order for people to make any kind of investment in any kind of additional resource in their home or in their business. So if we can get the economy stabilized and back on its feet, I think there's reason to be very optimistic. I would hope that it happens more in a 3 to month time frame and not 2 to 3 years, but I understand Mr. Keller's reasons to be concerned for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's sobering, but still such a complex situation. And I think the thing that we have talked a little bit less about, we've talked more about markets and fundamental drivers, but not quite so much about the role of policy here. Obviously, from the federal government, things are complicated, but we're not expecting a huge green stimulus at the moment. But there are other actors here, cities, states, corporations, et cetera, Dr. Browell, your work, you've done some work around this, around the role of cities, states, and other subnational actors.
Yes,
How can you talk about the way that cities and states are responding to this crisis, and how that mirrors the way that cities and states and other subnational actors have acted on the climate crisis and on deploying clean energy solutions?
Thank you, Christian. I believe that the US is in a peculiar position where the momentum for decarbonization is coming from these subnational actors that you named: states, cities, municipalities, often even utilities, Exelon, and others. And this is in stark contrast to many European countries where such changes are often driven by the national governments or even by the union itself. So I have compiled several options, namely 3, that states and subnational players could implement to move forward. So first, and the foremost important one, is to set a target. Again, back to my comparison of losing weight: without a target, you're not getting anywhere. And we have seen a tidal wave of announcement from these subnational players that are going 80%, 100% renewable by a certain date in the future. So we're not talking short term. Again, back to my point, we're talking long-term change. And the impacts and implications from such subnational actions are actually very neatly summarized in America's Pledge Report that is updated yearly. So spoiler alert, even with all the subnational actors, even if all the commitments are going to materialize, we're nowhere close to meeting the Paris targets of warming well below 1.5%. So this is really concerning, and this again points back to the need for federal action, even in the face of subnational actors being really committed to this change. So if a city municipality doesn't have a plan, my first recommendation is to get one. The second thing is to simplify permitting for renewables, because red tape can easily kill projects or drag it out into permitting limbo. And so I commend New York State that just recently approved a dedicated office of renewable energy siting that enables large-scale projects over 25 megawatts to be permitted within a year. It's the first state. New York has the first mover advantage, and I hope that further states will follow. And my final recommendation is to buddy up. Just like losing weight, having a climate buddy, being part of a larger network has shown its effectiveness. So I would like to give an example of SoulSmart. It's a network of cities and municipalities with currently about 300 members, and they all work together to obtain certification of being friendly to solar businesses, partially also by cutting permitting times and simplifying the process.
So this has all been great progress to date. How do you see this moment of COVID-19 affecting those plans? Do you think this will slow down the commitments by cities and states to decarbonize? Do you think they'll speed it up, that they'll see new opportunities, that maybe they'll see an opportunity to move stronger and more forcefully, seeing as we've had strong, forceful moves around this pandemic?
I feel that I would like to bring back von Hayek's quote that this pandemic has showed us how little do we know about what we imagine we can design. And after reviewing multiple scenarios, it became clear to me that everybody was thinking about current trends, how current trends are projecting into the future. We're not thinking in terms of what's going to happen if a sudden change and switch in demand or supply, how this is going to impact our plants. And that would, in my view, would be the biggest lesson learned, that we need to start thinking also about such shifts. Again, I'm a long-term pessimist. I think by 2040, we will find this path. It will be something we didn't think about. For example, and this is how scenario planning can help us. Rather than looking at current trends and projecting them into the future, we should think about something completely outside the box. So in 1970, I like this example a lot. There was a scenario planner who came up with an idea that the USSR, and I'm from Estonia, a post-Soviet country, that this country is not going to be existing anymore in 20 years. And they were right. So they had that crystal ball. FEMA had a crystal ball by publishing a report, and they listed a global pandemic as one of their insights of what can happen in the future. This wasn't connected specifically to energy. They had also an earthquake and other national disasters. But we should start thinking about non-linear things that can happen in our energy system to completely disrupt it. So this would be my big lesson learned from this review. Christian, your sound is off.
Sorry. As someone who works at Rocky Mountain Institute, this nonlinear thinking is right along our lines. This is the sort of stuff that we love. So we're a little bit compressed on time here. We're going to need to, sorry we didn't get to everyone in this round. We're going to need to move forward now to the talking about the future. Where do we go from here? How do we use this momentum going forward? And I'd like to start this off with another one of these quick. And obviously the 10 words just went right out the window, but maybe if we can keep these to brief statements in terms of responses. So just a second. So coming out of this, if everyone can unmute here, because we're going to go around. So coming out of this crisis, what's the single most important thing that we can do moving forward to move to a clean energy future? And let's start with Dr. Levron.
I think we should restart the economy. We should get the oil impact fixed, which will take some time, but definitely continue with the R&D of new modules and get the installation going. I think we have enough momentum with all of the RPSs in the United States to get the growth.
Very good. And thank you for keeping that succinct in the nature of these. Mr. Ozolu from Canada, what's the biggest thing that can be done right now?
I think using the current COVID situation, the self-isolation as a leverage to benefit from online trainings for example, former oil workers who were losing their jobs, and those can be transitioned into renewable energy sectors, for example. So there's a great potential in that, and using the existing know-how, the knowledge to train people online, or using other tools like augmented reality, etc., to be on the field when the time comes, economy bounces back. So using the ample time to train people is, I think, a great opportunity.
Great. And Ms. Mintz, what are your thoughts on the biggest thing that can be done right now to move forward?
Well, spend money on getting the right politicians in office, because that's how we move forward. So let's support I'm sorry, Democrat. Sorry. And that is how we move forward. Past this period, that's how we get the ITC. And since I'm supposed to focus on the US, that's how we get the ITC renewed at 30% for maybe 5 years, or indefinitely, or forever. That's how we get help to the small installers. That's how we get some sort of a 0% loan program to help people put solar on the roof in a time of affordability. If you don't have the right politicians in office, you don't get much done. And that's what I would say.
That's a great reality check from the political side of things. Dr. Weber, your thoughts on what the number one thing is that we could do to move forward to a clean energy future right now?
You know, to be very quick today with this low oil price, we could have the real opportunity to put the CO2 minimum price at $60 or something like that, without hurting the small people, without hurting the gasoline price at the pump. You know, use $15 per barrel of oil to bring us to a reasonable CO2 price. And I would say $60 would really, really help to decarbonize quickly.
That's a really interesting idea. Kingsmill Bond of Carbon Trackers proposed the same thing. And he pointed out that right now there's a danger of having economies get hooked on cheap oil, and that a high CO2 price, a high tax on that would help to, one, keep them from getting hooked on cheap oil and then having everything go haywire when oil prices go up again. But I'm talking too much now.
And the income can do many good things. You know, we can debate what to do with the money which comes in from such a carbon price.
Indeed. There's a lot of things we could do with that.
Yeah.
Mr. Keller from NREL, what do you think the number one biggest thing is we could do right now?
So again, for me as a scientist, I'm talking about the science. When you look at this, what we have to do by 2050, when you work backwards, we have about 10 years to create the technology we need and the innovations to really make an impact, to have an integrated energy system. So I think we have 10 years to come up with the innovations to really achieve that.
Yes, that seems to be what the IPCC is feeling as well. So a need for accelerated innovation, certainly. Mr. Totsekian, and forgive me
I
if
think you're going to see more stimulus dollars coming. I think the number one thing we can do is ensure that it's targeted to the right thing. If you back up to the financial crisis, there was hundreds of billions of dollars of stimulus from China, the United States, Europe, directed towards renewables. At the time, the renewables were quite expensive. And what that did was drive the learning curve effect and drive the costs of renewables down. It took 5 years. Within 5 years, we know how dramatic the cost reduction was, and that renewables started to become competitive on a grid parity, price parity basis. The number one thing I think that we need to be targeting now, given that emissions are 70 to 80% generated on the consuming side, understanding that what we have seen with this pandemic is that the way we live, work, and play can change, that the stimulus dollars that are potentially forthcoming should now be targeted towards the consumption side of the equation to drive learning curve effects in cost reduction, in potentially things like battery technologies for converting combustion engines at large into electric motors and things like that to drive those costs even lower. Because I think putting more stimulus dollars in the upfront supply side is not going to be as meaningful right now as putting it on the demand side, so that you have equal development of the energy system going forward.
Certainly. Yeah, I think we talk a lot about the supply side instead of the demand side, and certainly we have seen profound impacts from the demand side. Ms. Del Chiaro, it's so hard not to call you Bernadette.
Please call me Bernadette.
What can we do right now? What's the biggest
single biggest thing is cut red tape. Streamlined permitting is no-touch permitting. It is COVID friendly. It is business friendly. It's consumer friendly. Cut red tape in the permitting offices, in the utility interconnection process, and in government incentive programs, and we will help. The multiplier effect will get our dollars to go a lot further, and we will lower the cost of clean energy.
Very good.
Great. Yes. I noticed you have special red tape cutting scissors. And Dr. Browell, your thoughts. What's the biggest thing we can do right now?
I love the scissors, by the way, and I totally agree. So as a behavioral scientist, I would change the default option. We're often talking about path dependencies, and as humans, we often make a decision, for example, when we're signing up for on an electric provider's page, and we often, 90% of the times, we don't change the default. So if we just had green defaults in our thinking everywhere, that would be half the battle would be won. And I want to expand that thinking beyond green defaults for electricity. It could be a green default for a green home. When I was buying a house, I didn't have that option. It could be green default for an electric car or hydrogen car. When we're negotiating a new job, default could be working remotely, and then you start negotiating backwards of how many days you actually need to be in the office, and that'd be the most environmentally friendly way. Or green default shipping on Amazon packages. And the list goes on and on, but we behaviorally suffer from that, from the path dependency, and to overcome those. The easiest way is to start down the environmentally friendly path so that we don't have to switch horses in the midstream.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, that's, you know, I guess we don't think about the defaults. That's what makes them defaults. Dr. Levron, in this opening round, you said that what we could do is reopen the economy. You know, when this is currently such a big public health crisis, how do we get things back going in a safe way? How can we get the renewable energy industry going again in a way that without sacrificing the danger that we're going to have another upsurge?
Well, what I meant is financial support for financial fund that is available for large projects, or financial fund for the installation companies that today is quite slow and missing. And many large projects in the United States are being delayed because they are not financed properly. Okay, so that was my point of reference to economical impact. As far as the technological impact, I think we should continue, and I agree with the speakers here that we should continue the evolution of larger modules and better technology, because that will drive the cost of installation down. So all of the formula for and the red tapes on approvals are paramount, because we can't install the large system, the small systems, if they are not approved. So all of this, if you wish, environment for better business, added with availability of installers, because we don't have enough people to install the systems today. And the logistics is missing because the modules are not arriving on time, even though the demand is lower than we had before. So all of this complex formula has to be solved with very close cooperation of all of the involved entities, which is installers, manufacturers of the modules, the approval authorities of the projects, and the financial authorities, financial institution to support the installations. Many projects are sitting with no finance, and that is a significant problem. So to start all this, we have to have an orchestra that works with all of the tools that we need in harmony. Without it, will be very difficult.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I hear you. I've been hearing the same thing.
Christian?
Yes.
So do you think we need an orchestra, American orchestra or global?
No, this is a very good question. In our business, it's global because we get modules from overseas. We get technology developed overseas. Of course, it's global. And finance, by the way, is global now too.
How do you think, sorry for this question, but we are asking this question also in other continents, because we can notice with the geopolitical situation that a lot of countries and people, they try to separate, yes? So not only stay at home, but also stay in your country, yes? And how do you feel, how it can be overcome, how we can overcome this situation through our personal relationships?
Yeah, I don't believe you can block or disrupt this industry from a global collaboration. I don't think it's possible anymore. No matter how the geopolitical situation will be, we can't grow this industry without global investment and global technology and global growth. This is not possible, Thomas. It's not realistic if people think that they can only survive on the localized level. Not realistic. Say building solar business in the US with no cell manufacturing, how do you do that? Okay, It's not possible. Or building the industry with no technology, not possible.
Can I ask one question to Bernadette also? Because Bernadette is working with the companies. And of course, you are explaining to your members that together we are stronger, yes? And this is one of our, let's say, main messages, together we are stronger. So what are your arguments and how would you explain to people from the international audience?
So what are my arguments for what exactly, Thomas? Sorry.
Explain to the people that together we are stronger, it's not just a slogan, but that's, you know, it's something which we should apply in practice.
Well, I mean, there is really no argument that the together is not just a community level or state level, or it's a global economy, it's a global market. There's the impact that the trade wars have had on the lack of decline in the cost of solar, the increase in the price of modules, and its impact on slowing us down. Is proof alone that this is an integrated market, and we are absolutely need to work together to realize realize a better future and a better in every possible way. I think hopefully, as we've all talked about and people have opined about in many different forums, that crises create opportunities and sort of reorganize priorities. And I think that's happening at the household level, and it's happening hopefully at the global level. If we can maintain good, strong leadership and a good, strong sense of where we're headed. And I think that kind of leadership and cooperation can happen from the business community and not just leave it to politicians. So I think we're all the place, leadership happens in many different forms and cooperation happens. And, hopefully this, Tamás, you're bringing us all together at a drop of a hat and having a global conversation to me is just part and parcel of where we're headed and what we need to do.
So we're doing this all together, and this is, obviously the process of having this energy transition is complex, it's multifaceted, even something as simple as installing solar. It involves finance, it involves modules, it involves installers. There's one aspect of that I want to get to, which is the workforce. And that is something which, we use products from all over the world, but to install these things, it needs to be local. Now, in the United States, we have more than last check, I think 17 million people filing for unemployment. I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but Mr. Ozolu, maybe you could comment here. You mentioned the way that there's now this trend to use online learning to train installers. Do you see this as something that's coming out of this virus that we could apply more broadly to get more people to work, which I know is an urgent need in this country and probably in Canada as well?
Yeah, I think Peter can also assert that a little more in detail, but there is a part of the population, the workforce, who lost their jobs due to the oil price decline, and that the Alberta, for example, cost of oil is more. The extract oil is more than the other parts of the world, etc. So lots of people were laid off, and they need jobs, and there's a great opportunity for them to transition into, for example, some other sectors that are more promising, in the coming future. This is, I think, the time to consider these. And let's say certification of, for example, NABCEP is a certification body. I mean, NABCEP certified professional installers, for example. Maybe the governments or some institutions can provide access to those programs to train these people and make the workforce ready, because I believe personally that the clean tech is the future. So there's no reason to wait for training, getting the required training for people.
Certainly, and this could probably move beyond training. I noticed that some of your work is in artificial intelligence. Can you talk about other ways that we could use AI perhaps to accelerate the energy transition going forward?
Yeah, there are ways to currently, like even Trina Solar is implementing artificial intelligence in energy systems, like solar energy systems, to harness the sun in a better way, using the like certain algorithms, tracking the sun, but also utilizing the bifacial solar technology and optimizing the amount of sun received from the ground reflectivity on the backside of the panels is probably adding a significant level of increase in the electricity generation of the plants. And using the algorithms, AI algorithms, you can boost it up. Let's say you can add like a couple of more % per year of electricity generation, which is I think an important amount without adding an important cost. So AI helps optimizing the use of, let's say, the energy, the sunlight in these kinds of systems. So we'll have more opportunities using AI in the coming decade or within this decade in the energy systems and managing the energy traffic as well, utilizing battery energy, battery storage systems. So we'll need traffic operators in a way, and AI will help a lot. So, and the way people consume the energy, their own home energies or in commerce, will be also shifting towards distributed energy systems rather than just utilizing the large scale utilities. So this will also avoid transmission losses as well as the costs in the transmission infrastructure. So there's a great benefit of optimizing the usage of energy systems and the way we generate energy and how to manage the bridge. I mean the supply and demand balance in a smart way is the current trend, and we'll, I think, see the benefit of using AI in this decade with the leveraging the COVID effect.
Certainly, and I'm sure Dr. Levron, you would have more to say about that based upon your current job as CEO, your new company here, which does a lot of that sort of work. But unfortunately, we're running low on time, so we're going to have to go straight to the questions here. We have a bunch coming in. We have, forgive me if I butcher this name, Jalal Halmila asking about the impact of COVID-19 on the grid in terms of meeting shifting energy demand across the United States with offices and businesses shut down and people working from home. How is this affecting the shifting energy demand? Mr. Keller, perhaps?
Well, so look, I don't know what they look. I mean, I think at least when I look at Enra, look, we have 2,700 people all working from home. So this transition worked extremely well. I think what's will happening is that, let's say if we have a stimulus, we have to increase fast internet to everybody across the US, which will also then allow us, which the colleague from Canada mentioned, with machine learning, artificial intelligence, to really develop a brand new system, which then also will help us to regulate the grid. So I don't know really if the shift happened, if this is a big impact for utilities. So at least when we reached out to our utilities, we haven't seen that this, by working from home, really shifted the big loads. It's also very interesting when you look at where perhaps you can link this, how we're using the internet at home. When you look at some of this data, it was very interesting because we always had these peaks in the evening, and right now there is pretty much, the peak has leveled out across the whole day. I would argue that perhaps we're seeing the same on the electricity usage within our houses. So I don't think that this is a major impact. I think there's more impact by the manufacturing places shutting down, which uses much more energy. But that's just my guess.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when I've seen the data on a grid-wide level, what I've seen is less electricity demand overall. And since solar and wind, at least in competitive electricity markets, are zero marginal cost producers, they still run. Whereas the coal plants are suddenly in an even worse situation than they were before.
Yeah, I mean, in Germany, with 52% in the first quarter now from renewables, I think this was definitely moved by this fact that solar and wind is available anyway, whereas power plants can be reduced. I think the overall energy consumption went down. And by the way, in Germany, the CO2 emissions went down, and Germany will probably reach the 2020 climate goals, which politics had already determined were unavailable in 2020. So Corona has done this trick.
Certainly, though, we must also argue that economic collapse is not the way that we want to achieve low emissions. We need to work on the structural solutions.
Yeah, but on climbing up out of the hole, we could try to do things a little bit smarter than we did when we fell into the hole.
Certainly. And if this accelerates the coal fleet, I think that's certainly a progress. We have another question here from Dave Renna. Could any of the panelists comment on statements made at a recent IRENA webinar that the current low oil prices result in a reduction in the high subsidies the fossil fuel industry has been benefiting from over the years, which could be good in the long run for renewables? Dr. Gay, Mr. Tsvetsekian, anyone?
I'll chime in here, Christian.
Sure.
You could also read that and flip it on its head and say that the oil and gas industries, with their close relationship with the leadership in governments, might become greater beneficiaries of a disproportionate amount of the funds that are suddenly flowing, and the rich get richer. One of the comments I'll just chime in on before we shift gears from the first question is, we have a chance here. The services that are running, it may not be the very large industrial ones, but they're the commercial ones, the grocery stores, the hospitals, the hotels have become home to a lot of the homeless. They are consuming power. Saving money is an immediate opportunity, saving demand charges, minimizing the spikes. What I think may happen here is that we start with load control, that the smart appliances, the intelligence we can incorporate into the switchgear that's with a building or a commercial facility, malls and the like, we can save electricity. That saves the cash flow in an environment where commercial businesses are struggling to be paid because their customers are struggling to be paid. So being able to get a foothold into commercial opportunities is ripe, that we can immediately, without very much need for capital, begin to control loads, minimize energy consumption, bring energy efficiency, the things that you do, Christian, at RMI day and night, open the door for then integrating upstream into storage and better optimizing how we use the grid. And I think I like Bernadette's use of scissors here. I think that, Thomas, we have a new opportunity to switch from thumbs up to cut the red tape. And the red tape isn't just the permitting tape, it's the interference of governments and tariffs and all those other kinds of factors that have had far more impact on our ability to execute what we know we can do. I think we could make better use of the national labs. We don't have a decade, we don't need new technology. We need to be able to run faster with the technologies that we have. We could engage the national labs in helping connect communities, that communities can operate more efficiently. We can begin with the grocery stores and the hospitals, mobilize the scenario planning, help the communities. A number of them have sort of pioneered the way to develop 100% renewable visions. Let's not lose that momentum, but build on those visions and help share them, because we are now better connected to each other. We all recognize from the pandemic that the planet is connected. We're all connected together. John Muir had this expression, I don't recall exactly, but if you pull one thread, everything comes unraveled. We can see that the impact of how vulnerable all of us are, and flip that into how resilient all of us can be, learning from each other out at the edges, and not having government impose a lot of rules about how we're supposed to get things done. I think we could seize the moment and define it for ourselves. Off my soapbox now.
Can I say something
Good
on that?
second.
Yeah. So the whole issue of subsidies is very delicate and complicated, very complicated, regionally dependent. What I'm fascinated by right now is the use of oil and gas technologies in the renewable space. And what we're seeing up here in Canada is the use of these advanced drilling technologies in the geothermal area. And we've got 3 companies here that are showing tremendous promise, are getting government help to now drill and bring down the cost of geothermal wells, also with new heat exchanger technologies. And I think that, further to Dorico Zulu's comments about retraining workers, we're seeing workers on rigs go and now drilling geothermal wells to provide base load heat, base load potentially power. There's some very interesting technologies with lower heat gradients. So I think that we've seen how solar and wind came down in cost dramatically over the last 10 years, in large part stimulated by, as I said, the financial crisis stimulus money that occurred 10 years ago. We now have this opportunity to bring geothermal costs down quite dramatically and use the existing technologies that have been developed in the last decade so successfully on the oil and gas side.
That's fascinating. I feel like we talk so much about solar. Geothermal is a great technology that we don't hear as much about. Certainly it works well, working well in Iceland and Costa Rica, but if we can make it more accessible in more regions, boy, 24/7.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the cost has been the prohibitive thing, but the new drilling technologies are changing that. And, there's technologies to create convection loops underground. There's a company up here in Canada called Ever Technologies. I mean, it's just, as I said, when you put your mind to these things and cross-pollinate across energy systems, I think you're going to see, I'm actually, despite all the negative talk and the recency bias of what's going on, I think we're going to enter another renaissance here in a couple of years, where you're going to see step changes in costs coming down in the renewable space in places where that are beyond solar and wind, like the hydrogen is another space, turning oil fields into hydrogen fields, right? Leaving the carbon underground and bringing just the hydrogen up. That's happening up here as well.
Wow, and I feel like hydrogen is something we could spend another whole 90 minutes or maybe 3 hours talking about. We have only a few minutes left. I want to get some closing thoughts here. Dr. Weber, I see you trying to speak, but you're on mute.
Yes, I just want to say tomorrow we have a whole session devoted to the hydrogen issue, so we can wait this.
There you go. So I want to get some closing thoughts from everyone. And one word that's come up over and over again is resilience here. Obviously, we've been shown by this crisis the need to have not just a clean power system, but a resilient systems throughout our lives. Certainly every time we have a crisis like this, and this is not the only crisis we're experiencing, we suddenly discover the value of having reliable services and resilient services. So what can we do to build back? We're going to do another one of these quick rounds. What can we do to build back more resiliently and better?
Well, maybe I can very quickly inject the real resilience results in Germany. In Germany, we had our old grid, which had a certain number of minutes of annual failure, the SAIDI index, more than 20 minutes. Now that we integrated the renewables, the fluctuating renewables, we needed intelligent nodes, what we just discussed, artificial intelligence. Doruk alluded to this. Today, our German system has only 10 minutes of failure per year, whereas France and UK, with all their stable thermal power plants, nuclear power plants, have 50 or 70 minutes, because they don't need to think about how to make an intelligent grid, how to build it resilient. So I always say in Germany, if now an accident kicks out a major power line, there will be no blackout, because the system will automatically adjust itself. Because if a system can deal with 10 megawatts of PV suddenly being away because a cloud covers a PV field, it can be as well deal with all other kinds of unexpected things. So the renewable dominated grid system is more resilient than the old system, which relied on 24-hour power plants running.
Absolutely. Now we have some people who have a hard stop here who are going to need to go soon. But quickly, you know, I can't help but think, Dr. Levron, your new company, Electrical Grid Monitoring, it produces exactly these sorts of solutions that can work to make a smarter, more intelligent grid. Is this part
correct.
of this?
Yes, our company creates the software, sensing first, but then a software to coordinate or to enhance the resiliency of the grid, improve the reliability, of course, and integrate quickly and efficiently the renewables, DER, distributed architecture resources. So yes, and we're offering it now in the market. Technology is available.
And perhaps not an accident that after what, 4 decades of working in renewable energy, you're now on this angle, which seems to be so much of the cutting edge. Dr. Bravo,
yes.
What can we do now to build back, not just build back, but to build, as we say at Rocky Mountain Institute, build back better? What can we do for a more resilient, clean system going forward?
I would like to bring back a quote that if we build it, they will come. And I think that in many cases, this is a wrong thinking. So we can think about macro level changes that we need to address, but also we should think about the micro agents that are going to be driving the demand and that are going to be adopting these changes. So the little people are the consumers, the builders of buildings, the auto dealers, all of them. So from the behavioral side, ideally, we should design technologies that will be understandable and really, really user-friendly. And having worked with incredibly smart engineers, I often find that once the product is designed, there is often another level of work of how can we make it so clear, so adaptable that everybody will want to use it. Nobody thought that, the change from the Stone Age didn't happen for the lack of stones. And this kind of change will also happen this time.
Excellent. Bernadette, your thoughts on building back resiliently, like how we come out of this crisis with a more resilient as an industry, more resilient in our power systems?
Well, I mean, I think coming out of lots of talk have been focused on the previous crises in the 1970s where small was beautiful. I think local is resilient, renewables are reliable. And I just kind of maintain that I think the single biggest thing we can do is just become more efficient as a society in every way possible. I'll stick with that one.
Yeah, love it. So easier to understand solutions, solutions that are behaviorally easy for people to take on, and more efficient solutions, certainly. Mr. Ozolu, what are your thoughts on how we build back better from this crisis?
I think thinking all together, like utilizing more like central bodies, I mean, let's say think tanks and associations getting, more together using online collaboration tools, not only video conferencing, but also creating some output and influencing the policy side with the input coming from the technology providers. So it's a great, there's a synergy in all these three bodies to navigate the crisis.
Morning. Morning.
So, Paula, Ms. Mintz, I'm sorry, it's so hard for me to remember to call people with their last names who I've known for so many years.
Call me Paula.
So your thoughts, what are the things we need to do to really build back resiliently? How can
I'm going to pull back and take a look again at one of my messages. First of all, I want to really impress on everybody that no forecast you see probably until through 2022 is worth anything at this point, which is really tough for me because I'm writing a report that has a forecast in it and focuses on 2020 and analysis of 2019. So I have a caveat all over that report that no forecast is reliable. And that's the truth. So aside from the fact we're all right here, how to build back more resiliency, but the whole society needs to build back, which is going to come first. Second of all, in terms of the solar industry, if we want to be resilient country by country by country, US looking at us right now, we need to import less and build more. That will raise the cost of technology unless government steps in and subsidizes it. But without a resilient value chain from end to end, some resiliency built in, we end up potentially in the same position again. So we got to put the right people in office, and they've got to put money towards, love you thin films, crystalline cells, and build the cells to fill the modules at least to 50% of what we can put in the ground and on the roof. And without that, this is a huge, horrible example of what I've again been writing about for 15 years. We have to have a resilient supply chain.
Wow. Well, that's certainly a big challenge and a big conversation about domestic manufacturing in the United States. Boy, that took a lot of my career covering that. Mr. Keller, your thoughts from NREL, like what's the solution to build back more resiliently?
So I think Ike summarized it very nicely what's going on in Germany. So I think it's also here, you're seeing it's much more local, a distributed energy system, which will be run with an autonomous system, autonomous energy systems. So the only caveat is we have to get the cybersecurity under control to do this. But this is where we think the future will go.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Tsetsekian, your thoughts on resiliency and how we do this?
Yeah, well, I think that I echo what's already been said in many ways, but resilience, well, let's get back to the beginning of this session where we were talking about the threat of regressing, going backwards from the gains that have been made effectively. And so the number one thing in my mind is to avoid regressing back to greater dominance on, say, oil and gas from foreign sources, which is a dynamic that is in play. So that's, number one, we don't want to regress. And to build resiliency, I mean, I'm certainly have long written about and talked about what Bernadette was saying, the energy efficiency. There's so much waste in the system. And we're entering an era where we have very cheap energy from all sources. There's a tremendous propensity to waste. And when you waste, you become dependent upon the way you live, work, and play on that wasted energy. And so energy efficiency and a sense of conservation will lead to greater resiliency in addition to all the other things that have been said.
Mm-hmm. So certainly that cybersecurity piece, Mr. Keller, absolutely, that's a critical part here. And the efficiency, I think this is something that keeps coming back over and over again. I think the crises expose the lack of efficiency at times. Any closing words here on how we build back better, Dr. Gay?
From the crisis, we learned that the more data we have, the better we can manage. I think Archimedes said something like, give me a lever and a place to stand and I can move the earth. Give us data, we can make the earth resilient here. We have the tools, but we need the data in order to be able to optimize what we do.
And maybe my final words, because we always speak that solar is either B2B or B2C, but actually in our club, we invented it's neither B2B nor B2C, it's H2H, human to human. And I think that this is the biggest fundament of the whole resilience, If we manage, this human to human relationship also on a global level, then other stuff will come. This is what I believe. That's why you see we are together and we organize everything in just 2 weeks because it's based on human to human.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for putting this together, Tomasz, and for bringing together this really Excellent panel. I'm not sure I've ever been in a meeting with so many extremely distinguished, bright people with so much experience, you know, so much to share, so much knowledge. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to
Thank
you,
you.
Christian.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Cheers out.